Morning, everyone. I'd like to talk to you this morning about reasons pastors and local church leaders should think like historians. Reasons pastors and local church leaders should think like historians. And there should be my main points up on the screen in a moment, so you can follow along and take notes. I have read where the vocation of teaching history has hit hard times. Undergraduate and graduate degrees in the subject and discipline of history is in decline, so much so that Boston University posted the following on its website. So you think you want to study history, but are afraid it won't be the best choice for you? Then the post goes on to dispel myths that make some nervous about majoring or minoring in history. This is from the site. Myth: history is boring. Maybe you had an awkward experience in high school. You assume history is going to be all names and dates and, quote, one damn thing after another, end quote. Maybe, like Virginia Woolf, you've concluded that history is too much about old white men and their wars, or that it is more or less bunk, as Henry Ford proclaimed. But it is not at all like that. History is not designed around state-mandated textbooks or standardized tests. Historical knowledge is powerful currency in the 21st century, this website post continues. History increases cultural literacy and sensitivity. You will learn to consider multiple points of view and understand changing global contexts. And you will even get more jokes. It also offers a unique education in the curation of content, teaching how to collect, evaluate, and arrange a variety of sources into persuasive arguments and narratives. You'll learn good stories. By interpreting the past, you will better understand yourself. And those who know their history help to shape how people see themselves in the present and what they will hope for in the future. That's a great post, and it speaks to the power of history and its use by local church pastors and leaders in the congregation. The discipline of history, the task of history, is about uncovering information often buried and forgotten. It is about putting things in context to discover deeper truths. History can be quite revelatory. Remember the great story in the 24th chapter of the Gospel of Luke, the road to Emmaus story? How does history happen in that story? Anybody? Yeah. They're walking along the road, and they're all despairing and downtrodden and defeated. And this stranger comes up from behind them and tells them their history, right? I mean, he opened to them the scriptures, but, you know, the way the story is framed is, you know, he tells them, it says, from the Hebrew scriptures through the prophets. And after they listen to him, and after he appears to them in the breaking of the bread, hello, Holy Communion this morning, when he appears to them in the breaking of the bread, what do they say? Did not our hearts burn within us as he talked to us, as he told us our story, along the road? History in the life of our congregations can be that revelatory. The craft of doing history is far more than listing names and dates. History's product is not the creation of fancy, colorful timelines. The work of history offers a perspective on the fine line between myth and reality. From there, the art of history is walking that line to offer compelling narratives that move people into living their beliefs and taking action. As I reminded you in the story that I told you about the Ben Franklin Bridge, it just isn't a story of the church that moved the bridge, but how history is the bridge that moves the church. Church leaders and laity and clergy, if they intend to be faithful and successful, need to learn to think like historians. That means basing decisions grounded on correct understanding of facts and having an open mind even about long-held assumptions. Step one is learning to understand your local history. Step two is making sure it is recorded well. And lots of what we do at GCAH is ensure that it's recorded well. Churches should from time to time write and share their history as an example of living faith, living in and into faith. By writing your history, your congregation has the opportunity to grow emotionally and spiritually. It also creates a means to invite visitors and others in the community to discover what impact your congregation has had in the social setting where you are. How many of your congregations have histories? Have a book or a pamphlet or a story of its, okay? How old is it? When's the last time somebody wrote the new chapter or the current chapter? Well, that's good. My sense is that in a lot of cases, histories may not have been written since the 50s or the 60s, and it's time for somebody to take on that task, or a task force or a task group to take on that task. And GCAH would have a resource to share with you about how to write your congregation's local history. In my travels across the connection, I often hear what I consider to be a dangerous, even false, deadly distinction or dichotomy, that the church needs to choose between mission and history. Hear me? That it's an either or. That there's mission and there's history. And people that are concerned with mission are concerned with what's out ahead, and people that are concerned with history are concerned with what's past and behind. Well, that's just not a correct dichotomy. If we're going to be deadly serious and focused on the future, we need to understand the past. This is where, I think the very dangerous word and distinction needs to be made about nostalgia. Because I think what a lot of people get confused about that are mission-minded, think that history is all about nostalgia, and nothing could be further from the truth. But we in the church get very much caught in this trap. What is nostalgia? Longing, good. Longing for the past. What else? Romanticizing, sentimentalizing the past. Selective. Yeah, very good. It's were the good old days really that good? Or will they pass that? Nostalgia is a sentiment of loss and displacement. a romance with a fantasy of what it was like. The church doesn't need to choose between mission and history. That is, if we are going to be duly and seriously focused on the future, there needs to be less energy and resources spent on the past. That's what some people think. History and mission set in opposition to each other is a very lethal formula. I am suggesting that your heritage is key and inseparable to mission. Without a sense of where and what we've come from, how can we know where we're going or be prepared to face what lies ahead? History, and your use of history in your congregation, is strategic, a very strategic tool. In Methodist Church in Britain, when there was an attempt to restructure the administrative order of the church and really downsize the work and resources they devoted to preserving and promoting their history, Tim McQuibbin, who was the leader of the Heritage Commission at that point in time, wrote a paper that's called Heritage is Mission. Heritage is mission. And it was his way of saying, you can't have the future without dealing with where you've come from and how you got to be where you are. And that is far from a longing for the past and sentimentality and that sense of displacement and the fantasy of having things the way they were. I want to suggest to you some reasons that history is a strategic tool for your congregation and ways to encourage and implore you to find ways to enliven, discuss, and celebrate your local church's histories. First, history is a problem-solving tool. History is a problem-solving tool. Most common mistake leaders make when faced with problems is failing to identify the fundamental issue and deepen understanding about what they're really up against. There's a famous quote from Albert Einstein about how, when given an hour to solve a problem, he would spend 55 minutes thinking about the problem and 5 minutes coming up with possible solutions. It is a wise, critical strategy. Critical thinking requires good data. Information collected in the recent, distant past for analysis is important. Before we talk about solutions, there must be careful analyzing. And a great part of your analysis must be among historical data. UMCOM, United Methodist Communications, has a resource that you can easily access online by either going to their website and searching or Googling UMCOM analytics for local churches as a guide to use history as a means of deepening understanding about your mission context and what decisions you face in the future. History, not that we've always done it that way, excuse for history. History must be part of your analysis of your mission context. History, like, what was the mission context and impetus for the creation and service of this congregation and ministry? What was it that got it started? What was the spirit? What was the need? What was happening in the surrounding community that created the burning passion for the people who were in your congregation to get it started? When were there changes to that? How did the changes that happened in the congregation and the community affect the church's, sense of mission? I think a lot of our congregations are stuck in doing the same old repetition of what always was, nostalgia, as opposed to using history as a tool to analyze what was the spark that got it started. What were the things that fanned the flames to growth? What were the challenges and impediments to growth? All as a means to understand what it was that got us started, what it was that continued us in success, led us through challenges and failures, and bring us to the context of where we are today, not replicating the exact missionary purpose that started the congregation, but adapting the spirit that stirred the beginning of the congregation and reimagining that in the present context. Reviewing past events is important for understanding the points at which a ministry's trajectory shifted and for what reasons. There may need to be consultation with folk who have had experiences and know stories from years ago. What people or records might there be for you to explore? Who might there be in the congregation and in the community for you to interview about what the church's life and history has been? What people or records might you explore for a sense of who and what ministry has been for good and not so good? Sometimes the past isn't pretty, but it's also very useful. I'm going to suggest this a little bit further down the line, but let me mention it now as well and just underscore it as I bring these remarks to conclusions. Have any of you ever heard of a consultative tool called a Wall of Wonder? Wall of Wonder? Really, this is a great thing that for you to try, particularly if you're having a planning retreat or a visioning time, or you're celebrating an anniversary in your local church. Take a wall. Wall of Wonder involves a wall. Take a wall someplace that's blank or can be made blank. And then, cordon the wall off with some dates or eras. And have people in the congregation bring mementos that they have from their history with the congregation. Explore files and records in your church and then place them on the wall, according to those eras. Maybe they're old anniversary booklets, maybe they're old church bulletins, maybe they're old church newsletters, maybe there's, photographs from family albums or whatever, and begin to chart on this wall, according to eras, what the congregation's life looked like. And then have a small group of people, begin to discern those pictures. Or at the planning retreat, have people take some time to discern those pictures and say, okay, where were the high points in this congregation's life? Where were the low points? Where were the successes? Where were the years of promise? Where were the hard times? Where were the turning points? Where were the challenges? Stir up some discussion about how we lived through those challenges, how we survived those challenges, how we got over on those challenges, how those challenges changed and influenced our ministry. What were the spirits and sources of instigation that got the congregation started and seen it through? And then, from all that, create a timeline of the congregation's life and see history as a means to understand congregational life as something that is in process and moving and not just stuck in present complaints and struggles. A path forward for a church. I invite you to consider, and this is something very easy for you for you to Google as well to find examples of how a wall of wonder can work. But it is a way of remembering and examining critically what a congregation's life cycle looks like, and to move people beyond just the nostalgia of the past. Yeah. Ah. Yeah, what's not there. What's not there is as instructive as what is there. Yeah. And maybe understanding what's not there then opens up some discussions about secrets and things that congregations have that are impediments to their full healing and engagement of the present moment. So, recognize with me, this is not lighthearted. This is not for the faint of heart. Be ready to be surprised, or be ready to take on some difficult questions that may emerge, but our not coming to terms with those questions is as great an impediment to growth as anything else. But, think of the Emmaus story and use the Emmaus story as a paradigm for why the Wall of Wonder works, and maybe hearts in your congregation will burn, among folk because they see and discern the Spirit's life and movement through many dangers, toils, and snares. Yeah. So a problem-solving tool. History. Congregational leaders and pastors need to think like historians, recognizing that using history in a congregation's life can be a problem-solving tool. And also let me add that, if you're looking for an excuse to do this, certainly the year before a church's anniversary can be a great time to do this. But if you're entering a planning phase in your congregation's life, if you're doing some visioning for, planning for the future, setting some new goals and objectives, it's also a very useful time. Have lots of Post-it papers, to put on the wall, and begin to have people dig into and come to understand, maybe for the first time, what the life cycle of their congregation's history is. Okay, that was number one. Using history as a problem-solving tool. Number two, congregational leaders and pastors need to know and understand their congregation's history as a means of outreach and community awareness. Knowing your congregation's history, being sure there are persons who are aware of and keeping historical records in and for your congregation is key to shaping a sense of your congregation's identity and developing its, now this is a real modern buzzword, marketing strategy. You have to know who you are if you're going to invite other people in. And understanding, that sense of your congregation's history is key to what you're going to tell other people they're getting into if they become a part of your congregation. Churches need good hooks. And good hooks come from great stories that your congregation has to share, to boast about. If you wanted to invite someone to your church that was brand new in the community, had not been to your church before, what are some of the defining moments or the defining stories that you would share with somebody to make them interested in becoming a part of your community? Can you, we don't have to take time to think about them now, but just, can you think of some, really good, I love the word in marketing strategy, hook. What would be the hook stories, the hook experiences in your congregation's life that would make somebody want to nibble on participation in your congregation? Can you think of some things? If you can't, then you need to do some digging. But I hope you can, and I hope you can, form and shape and maybe even embellish. In this line of work, I've said to some of you, we have a saying: never let the truth get in the way of a good story. Well, that may be a little bit too far afield, but embellishment is okay. What are some stories and experiences in the life and history of your congregation that would be attractive to others? I want to suggest to you that at St. George's, in the time that I was there, the congregation's coming to terms with its infamous checkered past in American historical race relations didn't turn out to be a negative, but turned out to be a positive. Because we honestly dealt with and faced the situation. And it became a hook. Because people saw not only a congregation that was interested in dealing with a difficult past, but was also trying to do something about it in the present. So, discover what might be those compelling moments and stories in your congregation's life and use them as a means of outreach and awareness. If you can tell a really compelling story, people will listen. If it is your story or a story associated with your congregation, it's part of your personal history and a perfect experience other people can be invited into. Local church histories, looking at past newsletters and church bulletins and special programs, is a way to build a story archive. Story archives are invaluable in inviting people to church, and experts say it is one way to particularly connect young adults to congregations. I'm just thinking of an amazing story about this. You may think of going through all these papers as a really boring exercise, but you may be completely surprised by what you find. I'm sure that there are people in your congregation that are always looking for a reason to get together and drink coffee and socialize. So what if you got a group of people together that went through some old church files and old church newsletters and old church photographs and whatnot, and began to categorize them and organize them, and you will be absolutely surprised at the kind of stuff they will find. I told you when I read the Robert Kennedy telegram last night, that was because somebody on our staff was processing a bunch of old church records and papers. We didn't know it was there. Look at what they found. And what a great story that emerged. The other one that I'm thinking of is that I served a church in Philadelphia, now closed, when we were processing their records for the archives of the Eastern Pennsylvania Conference. Somebody was sitting in the basement at St. George's going through this local church's records, and they're looking through all these papers that people kept. Oftentimes people keep way too much junk. And somebody's got to go through it and cull it. But there's some real adventures in the culling. And this person came running upstairs to my office with an autographed picture of Jack Benny in this church's pile of records. Autographed picture of Jack Benny. And the picture said, happy 39th birthday. I'll explain to those of you who don't know in a minute. Happy 39th birthday to the Pearl-Baird Bible class, Jack Benny. So Jack Benny had this shtick, right? That he didn't have a birthday after 39. And somebody in the Pearl-Baird Bible class obviously thought, it's our 39th birthday, what better thing to do than write Jack Benny a letter and ask him if he'll send us this is obviously in the 50s, if he'll send us an autographed picture. Son of a gun. He sent him an autographed picture and said, so there are all these treasures to find. And sometimes we're overwhelmed by the task, right? We're overwhelmed by the task of going through all these papers. But I'm telling you, maybe it's a cool thing. It's an inviting and engaging thing to get a couple of people together, once a week, once a month, whatever. Put on a pot of coffee, buy them a box of Dunkin' Donuts, and have them go through the papers with some guides, which GCAH can provide you, by the way, about what to keep and what to pitch. And you may be surprised by the stories that you find, by the integrity of a local church congregation's vision and mission and purpose that have long been buried under the stresses of the present moment. Outreach and community awareness can really be the result of going through these records. Outreach or marketing strategies begin with a focus on mission. They need to say, this is who we are, this is why we're here. And that sense of who we are and why we're here isn't only defined by what a local church is doing in the present moment. There are also rich stories and experiences of how that's happened and been proven in the past. A local congregation's history is critical to that exercise and may be able to offer a more dynamic way for you to tell your story. Who are you? What is your identity? How did this ministry come to be? Who was there at the start? What was their vision? What were the obstacles they faced and overcame? There's a great opportunity to build a bridge to folk in your community by sharing the primal stories and experiences that have been borne out in your local church's history. But remember, not the ones that end. And so this is why we are the way we are and always will be. Amen? So, problem-solving tool, know your congregation's history and use it as a means of outreach. Number 3, as a means to become more unified as a body. Effective leaders work hard to establish a unified culture. Some churches have experienced the equivalent of a merger in the business world. And 50 years ago, that was us. The United Methodist Church just celebrated its 50th anniversary, the 50th anniversary of a merger where previously separate and distinct bodies find themselves coming together and attempting to align their values and views. And I would submit to you, and I hope you have heard me say this loud and clear, that whether you come from the E part of our alphabet soup, or whether you come from the UB part of our alphabet soup, or whether you come from the ME part of our alphabet soup, there are constant and continual strains that were alive in each of our distinct bodies from the beginning that merged together and could have, in some ways, have made us stronger. I wish we would have concentrated on them more. Because E's and UB's and M's and UMC, black and white, gay and straight, have all been a part of a movement that has been concerned with people being invited into an experience with the love of God in Jesus Christ, and then, because of that experience, had their lives transformed and changed to become God's new creation, and have not been able to sit still or have passive and boring church services to celebrate inwardly, but to move outwardly. Whether you're an E or a UB or an M or a UMC, black, white, gay, straight, a global or local. That's our story, darn it, and we should stick to it. And that's our unique story. No offense, the Presbyterians can't claim it the same way, and the Lutherans can't claim it the same way, and the Episcopalians claim it. They have their own, and it's compelling, and it draws people to them. But this is our story, and this is the story that brings us together. This is the story that brings us together and keeps us together, that drew us together in all those years prior to 1968, that culminated in 1968 and leads us to where we are today. It should be and can be a source of unity if we can discover our stories in that essential form and keep it straight. Most congregations grow more slowly as new folks arrive. While the goal is always unity, there is a tendency to drift as paths diverge over time. Some think the United Methodist Church may be at just such a time. But great preacher and church historian and commentator Brian McLaren, you know that name, Brian McLaren, talks about the life cycle of an organization and says that in a organization's life cycle, there's an event that brings everybody together and there's a strong unity, but that over time, that unity becomes institutionalized, and if institutions like to do one thing better than any other thing, it's what? To keep things the same as they are, to survive. Well, that's not good for vitality in an organization. So sometimes as organizations age and go along that life cycle and live into that institutional survival mode, there needs to be some kind of an event that draws the institution back to what it was that was the spark that instigated its life to begin with. And I'm saying to you that from my analysis of our history, it's those three things that drew us together, that was the spark of our coming together and staying together and thriving and growing as people called United Methodist. The invitation to inclusion, that God's love was for everyone, and not to be taken sitting down, but experienced and transformed in that experience to be driven in mission into the world so that other people could come to know and experience the love of God that they started with in the first place. There's unity there. And that unity, I hope we can rediscover. Whether lanes have drifted over time or a merger brings incompatible paths towards one another, a handle on the origins of each group can help overcome tension and stir a potential and new way for a deeper unity. What would happen if, God help us for this to happen, if St. Louis in 2019 helped us to deepen into a new and different and stronger sense of unity and purpose among what are the historic, core values of people called United Methodist, whether from the E strain or the UB strain or the ME strain, or however we've come into the fold. So, reasons why church leaders need to think like historians is that history brings us to come to terms with what it was that brought us together in the first place, and how we can rediscover that and drive it in new ways into the future. Fourth, local church leaders And pastors need to think like historians because of vision, purpose, and motivation. Defining goals and communicating consistent messages are a large part of what leaders manage. Leaders produce forward thinking that is at its best when it is grounded in the past as a means to engage the present with identity and integrity, and then establish the solid foundations on which we build the future. The work of history that congregational leaders do, that we at GCAH do, is always about that tripartite formula. It is about understanding the past in order to better engage the present, true to who we are, and envision the future grounded on the solid rock of that ethos. Again, mission is about who we are and where we've come from. The past and an honest recognition of it is a motivator when organizations face adversity, pointing to past struggles and how they were overcome can inspire confidence that good things lie ahead. That in theological terms, God is busy doing what God does, creating new life out of death, causing hope to rise over despair, and creating new avenues of opportunity even in the midst of conflict, because God is not a God of the dead but of the living, to create new opportunities in the midst of conflict where, if left to our own devices, all we would see are roadblocks. That's the devil working in us from my perspective, people. That's not God. You don't give up at obstacles. You find the new opportunities. That's the work of the resurrection. I referred, once before to my favorite rendering of the resurrection story in the Gospel of Mark, where it's fascinating for me to think, in the Gospel of Mark, as the resurrection story is told, who don't you see? Who don't you see? Who's not there in the resurrection story of Mark? Who's not there? No, oh, they're there. Jesus isn't there. You never see Jesus in Mark. The tomb's empty, and the word comes to the disciples who are asking where Jesus is. He's out ahead of you. He's out ahead of you. So that's a forward path. That's, I use this word carefully, and not in terms of liberal or conservative, a progressive path, a forward path. He is at. Where will you find? I think the words in the Gospel of Mark, somebody can look them up, are where will we find him? And I think it's the angel that says to them, he's out ahead of you. He's out ahead of you. That's a powerful motivation. That's a powerful motivation. The past and an honest recognition of it is a motivator when an organization faces adversity. Pointing to past struggles and how they were overcome can inspire confidence that good things lie ahead. He is out ahead of you. That in theological terms, as I've said, God is busy doing what God does, creating new life out of death and hope over despair, and new avenues and opportunities where we saw only roadblocks. As we search our own pasts for wisdom, there are stories and testimonies that speak that truth that I hope you will uncover in your congregations and have them be part of the repository of great stories that get told. Organizations have this type of experience as well. A congregation that values past communications to its people that they matter is very important. How do you stay in touch with people in your congregation who may be the older ones, who have stories to tell? What if shut-in visitation in your congregations, sometimes the bane of lots of pastors' lives, or a great source of guilt? Speaking from experience, as a person that served in pastoral ministry, all the shut-ins I knew I needed to get to, but had what if a local church and the pastor created a system where it wasn't only the pastor that was responsible for those visits, but trained some youth and young adults in the congregation to go visit shut-ins with a tape recorder, and start a story corps about their remembrances of life in the congregation. And all those things that I've already said, why did you come here? When did you come? What were the things that were happening in there? What was it that drew you here? What were the challenges that the congregation, and to gather those stories and make them a part of the development of a new history in the congregation, or appreciation of its history. So all that is a part of saying leaders need to think like historians, and from it they get vision, purpose, and motivation. There's a sense of hope and urgency that comes from that as well. Our histories contain power in these ways that are not to be missed. Fifth, congregations and local church leaders need to use the congregation's history as a change management strategy. We may not like to admit this, but the one constant in our life together in congregations is change. Or maybe we don't have a problem admitting this, we have a problem just living this. Because we're always up against that institutional mind which wants to keep things as they are to feed the institution. We experience changing technologies and remember how we once performed various tasks. In a quickly changing culture where we live, we remember past times, leaders, colleagues, and events. In the church, as in organizational dynamics, managing change is one of the toughest skills to develop and execute. Many leaders study history to anticipate how future winds might shift. By reviewing nearly forgotten meeting minutes, memos, votes, and more, prospective leaders can use history to understand how change has looked in the past and how it may take shape in the future. Studying the past reminds us of the needs for change and all the ways it happens, even as we acknowledge how difficult it can be. So understanding a congregation's history helps us understand how to manage change. Last but not least, congregational leaders and pastors understand that the past is and needs to be usable. Historians talk about the significance of history because of its usefulness. Historians debate what constitutes a usable past, but they all agree that there are aspects of history that are very usable and useful. So there needs to be a process of filtering information into the most usable bits of data to that end. It is a process and a reason for continuing dialogue. And as I said to you before, GCAH can provide you, all you have to do is ask or go on our website to find it, a list of, as you go through historical data, what to keep and what to pitch, what will be useful and what will be superfluous. The trick is that we must be truthful and never flinch at what we find as we dive into our personal and organizational histories. I've shared with you already the honesty that needed to be faced at St. George's and continues to be faced at St. George's in part of the truth-telling. In the General Conference between 2012 and 2016, the United Methodist Church became aware, do you remember this story, that Methodists were key players in the greatest massacre of Native Americans in American history. You know this? Sand Creek. The raid was ordered by a Methodist governor of Colorado named John Evans, for whom Evanston, Illinois is named, and Northwestern University was founded. And a Methodist minister in good standing named John Chivington drunked up his troops and slaughtered women and children who were under the flag of the Stars and Stripes in an environment of protection, and then led with their body parts a parade through the streets of Denver. A Methodist minister in good standing. So, you know, when you gotta be ready to find, you gotta be ready to deal with what you find and not make it be more secrets. But again, I submit to you that, you know, being honest about what it is that we find creates new opportunities for ministry, as the United Methodist Church has discovered with tribal Native American leaders with whom we now have a burgeoning relationship. The past includes complicated politics, successes and failures, being on the wrong side of moral issues, where the church wants and needs to be salt and light. We must not hide from the truth. Leaders help to embrace the past and use the missteps, sins, and brokennesses to show how far we've come. One other quick St. George's story, and I will end. One of the ways at St. George's that we were that we dealt with the checkered racial past is by creating a program that is experienced by hundreds of confirmation classes who come to the, you know, Mother Methodist Church in Philadelphia in the Independence Hall District. We have, I don't know, 100, 150 of them in the sanctuary all at the same time. And all of a sudden, before the program starts, randomly, a group of 15 or 20 who really don't know what's happening are taken by an usher and moved to the balcony. Okay? And in the balcony, they're seated with a couple of African-American folk who are dressed in colonial costumes meant to be Richard Allen and Absalom Jones. And I'm up in the pulpit, and I'm talking about this, and I'm talking about that. And all of a sudden, these African-American dressed, you know, colonial people with these young people who have been ushered to the balcony, and they don't know why, start speaking from the balcony and interrupting me. And they tell the story of the unequal treatment that they've received at the hand of St. George's. And then they all walk out. Now, there's 100 people sitting on the floor that have just observed this, that don't know what's happening and are completely shocked, have no idea what's going on. And then I, or whoever's leading at that point, gets to tell the story of what happened. And, you know, what happened 200 years ago, and say, is this what we want the church to look like? The church confirmands that you're now becoming full member in, and that you'll now shape the vision for its future, is this the church that you want to be a part of? And are there ways and means and times and experiences in the United Methodist Church where this same kind of thing might be happening today? And you can see the lights, the lights begin. That's a way that the past was made usable. Transparency, authenticity, self-awareness is not only important to the life of the church and its ministries, it is an attractive feature in the community where you're planted and draw younger people into the congregation. I think that, I don't know, I mean, I've been away from St. George's for 7 years now. I have people now in their 20s, who come up to me and say, remember what happened at St. It's remarkable, but that painful past was made usable. Positive change can be framed with a historical understanding of your church. You can show people where they fit into the story, where they fit into its valued history, how their presence and contributions will be valued and make a difference. Ultimately, they will understand that they too and their contribution will be recognized and remembered. We are all historians, whether we like, value, or excited or bored by history or not. History is memory, and memories are powerful. Like I've already shared with you, and Bishop Park reminded you about how history is like the anamnesis that we'll experience in Holy Communion a few moments from now. Those who forget their history are not only ones who are condemned to repeat it, but will miss an awesome opportunity to engage the present and envision the future. The world is watching. A question I have been asking myself lately, and I think I've shared this with you once already, is how will history remember what the United Methodist Church will do in 2019? Will that memory say to both past and present and future generations of seekers something of the love divine, all loves excelling, that is the very essence of our United Methodist DNA? The world moves in cycles often predictable. Those who learn from history are not only going to find that history repeats itself, but history repeats itself in our successes too. So what new successes and opportunities are ahead of us? Few professors take the long view of things the way historians. Few professions take the long view of history the way historians do. Leaders in churches and any organizations will do best to cherish and learn from and use their history as a means to understand the present and envision the future.